You seem very comfortable here. Is there a reason you're loitering?
I'm just resting, officer. Show me out with one. Black male, early 40s, tan jacket, near the corner of 5th and Grand.
Near his belt. "Look at this guy," the officer sneered, voice slicing through the chatter. "Sitting here like he owns the street." The man lifted his eyes slowly, meeting a gaze full of derision. Nothing about his uniform, because there wasn't one, could make the officer hesitate in judgment. A war veteran once, now reduced to whispers and judgment from people who'd never walked in his shoes. "Another day begging, huh?" the officer taunted, leaning closer. The smell of coffee and asphalt mixed with the tension in the air. The homeless man stayed silent. He knew words could ignite faster than a match. But the officer's laughter drew attention, small crowds forming at a distance, their phones peeking up like surveillance drones. "You're a joke," the officer spat. "Pathetic." A sudden gust of wind flipped the man's bag, scattering crumbs across the pavement. The officer's eyes narrowed, hand twitching near his holster. "Pick it up, or you'll regret it," he said, voice low but heavy. Something in the man's jaw tightened. He had survived firefights, chaos, and orders that ended friends' lives, but this? This was a battlefield of silence, authority, and prejudice he couldn't fight with guns. And then a passerby stepped too close, camera raised. The officer's head snapped toward the lens. His grin faltered. The tension cracked. The man's hands clenched. He stood slowly. Every heartbeat screamed. Something was about to explode. Cliffhanger. The officer's hand shot toward his radio. The city's morning felt like glass underfoot, hard, sharp, and unforgiving. He sat on the cracked wooden bench, hands wrapped around a bag of day-old bread, trying to make it last through another empty day. He didn't hear the officer at first. The footsteps blended with the hum of traffic. Then the voice cut through. "Look at this guy." The officer's boots clicked like a metronome of judgment. The homeless man lifted his gaze. Pale blue eyes, tight jaw, uniform pressed like armor, but no warmth. Just authority and disdain. "Another day begging, huh?" The officer leaned close. The smell of coffee and exhaust hit the man simultaneously. The laughter that followed was sharp, slicing through the low murmur of passers-by. He stayed silent. Words were weapons, yes, but they also betrayed vulnerability. The officer thrived on it. "Pick it up, or you'll regret it," the officer spat, motioning toward the bag that had toppled. He remembered the battlefield, mud, gunfire, screams, commands. He remembered the men he saved, the men he lost. Here, on this cracked city sidewalk, there was no honor, only judgment. Only eyes that refused to see him beyond the surface. A passerby raised a phone. The officer's grin faltered. He glanced around, noticing the small crowd forming, phones like tiny lenses of accountability. The man clenched his fists. He stood slowly. Every heartbeat screamed. His boots scuffed the pavement. Tension pulled tight in the air like a bowstring. "You better move along," the officer said, voice low and dangerous, hand hovering near his holster. A gust of wind scattered crumbs across the street. Silence stretched. The crowd shifted uneasily. The man's eyes narrowed. He had survived firefights, chaos, and orders that ended friends' lives. But this was a battlefield of authority and bias he couldn't fight with weapons. The officer's hand shot toward his radio. And then, cliffhanger. The world seemed to hold its breath. Something was about to happen that would change everything. The wind tugged at his jacket as he leaned back against the bench, forcing his eyes to close for a moment. Memories rolled in like distant artillery fire. The street faded, replaced by sand, sweat, and the roar of helicopters. He was 29 again, boots on hot metal, rifle in hand. Orders shouted over the chaos. Friends beside him, faces tense but determined. He remembered the flash of a grenade, the fear, the split-second decisions that had saved lives. "Move! Move! Cover him!" The voice wasn't his, yet he remembered every command he'd given. Every man he had led. Every life he had pulled from death by sheer will. Back on the sidewalk, the present pressed in. The officer's mocking laughter echoed faintly in his mind, mixing with the gunfire, the shouting, the fear of loss. He'd survived firefights, explosions, and betrayal. But the humiliation here on city concrete was sharper than any battlefield scar. A car honked. People passed. Phones pointed at him like cameras in a war zone. He remembered the medals pinned to his chest, the nods of respect from strangers, the letters from families he had helped protect. None of it mattered here. "Another day begging, huh?" The officer's words sliced through memory and reality. His hands tightened around the bag. He imagined standing tall in uniform, not begging. Not mocked. Not invisible. He inhaled slowly. Control. Discipline. The same lessons drilled into him in the barracks. Stay calm. Observe. Survive. Yet the anger brewed, simmering under skin. Anger for the mockery, for the erasure of his life's work, for the silence of society that let authority mask prejudice as law. Pick it up, or you'll regret it. The voice brought him back. His eyes scanned the small crowd, noting the tension. Phones held like weapons. Witnesses. Potential allies. Potential enemies. Every microexpression carried judgment or fear. He imagined speaking, commanding, not in battle but in truth. A voice that could pierce the arrogance of authority. But silence held him. Strategy. Survival. Another gust of wind tossed crumbs from the bag, scattering them across the cracked pavement. He crouched to collect them. Each motion deliberate, controlled. And then, from the corner of his eye, he saw it. Something shifting in the officer's stance, hesitation he hadn't earned. A micro-expression of doubt. Cliffhanger. His hands froze mid-motion. The officer's radio crackled. Something was coming. He sensed it. Backup, escalation, exposure. The small crowd had grown, phones lifted like silent witnesses. The officer's smirk faltered, eyes darting from one recorder to the next. The homeless man, once invisible, now had attention. Eyes met his, some curious, some sympathetic, some wary. He kept his movements slow, deliberate, almost ritualistic. Each crumb of bread he bent to pick up became a statement of calm resilience. Every flick of the wind that scattered them across the cracked pavement felt like a challenge. He'd learned long ago to survive chaos, to anticipate the unpredictable. Today's battlefield was smaller, quieter, but no less dangerous. "Move along, buddy," the officer barked, voice low but sharp. The smirk was gone now, replaced with tension. He glanced at the forming crowd, irritation flashing in his pale eyes. The homeless man didn't speak. He simply straightened his back, meeting the officer's gaze with a quiet intensity honed over decades of discipline. Every microexpression, tight jaw, flared nostrils, subtle eye twitch, was a test. A teenager in the crowd whispered, phone pointed at the scene. "He's recording everything." The officer's head snapped toward the camera. "Step back. Move it." His voice carried authority, but it lacked conviction. It was brittle, strained. From the corner of the street, a woman in a business suit stepped closer, phone out. Her expression was calm but insistent, curious but careful. "Sir, I think people should see this," she said, eyes on the officer. Her tone carried moral weight, subtle but undeniable. The officer's hand twitched near his holster. His voice rose slightly. "I said move along." The homeless man remained silent, his breathing measured, calm. In his mind, he replayed flashbacks, the military drills, the missions, the moments when decisions meant life or death. He had learned to control fear, to anticipate reactions, to survive authority and chaos alike. And now he used the same discipline. No words, no sudden moves, no indication of weakness. The officer's authority was a performance, one that had cracked when the public gaze shifted toward accountability. A man in a hoodie muttered from the crowd, "He's just a man. Give him a break." His voice was low but carried enough to catch attention. Others murmured in agreement. Phones shifted, faces turned toward the officer, silently questioning his behavior. The officer's jaw tightened. "You people don't understand," he stopped. The sentence ended in the emptiness of a witness-filled street. Every movement was scrutinized, every reaction recorded. Public attention had become a form of leverage the officer hadn't anticipated. The homeless man finally bent to pick up the last few scattered crumbs. The motion was slow, deliberate, almost ceremonial. It was a subtle assertion, "I exist. I endure. I remain composed under pressure." "Why do you let this happen?" a voice called from the crowd, sharp and incredulous. The officer froze. He hadn't been asked questions like that in years. Authority was usually unquestioned. Today it was fragile. The man's mind raced, weighing options. Speak, confront, assert authority in truth, or stay silent and control the chaos through calm. He chose the latter. Silence, paired with measured action, was his strategy. A gust of wind caught the officer off guard, fluttering papers he held loosely in his hands. He cursed under his breath. The homeless man's eyes followed the motion, noting the tension in every twitch of the officer's face. Each micro-expression was a crack in the armor of intimidation. The crowd shifted. Phones raised higher, voices murmuring questions and commentary. The officer's movements became sharper, jerky, hands flaring outward in gestures meant to assert dominance, but only betraying nervousness. From the far side of the street, a young journalist stepped closer, notebook in hand. "Sir, why are you targeting him?" she asked, voice steady but loud enough for others to hear. Her tone carried authority, not of rank, but of public accountability. The officer's face reddened. He glanced at the growing circle of witnesses, at the small army of cameras silently documenting everything. He's just causing a scene," he stammered. His tone was clipped, brittle, betraying uncertainty. The homeless man's jaw tightened. Memories flashed, soldiers he had saved, missions completed, medals pinned to his chest, lives remembered. But here, on cracked concrete, respect was absent. Authority had become weaponized against him, twisted into mockery and microaggression. A soft murmur rose from the crowd. "He doesn't deserve this, leave him alone." The officer's eyes flicked between the protester, the journalist, and the phones. Fear, unfamiliar and sharp, crept into his posture. Hands hovering, stance rigid, jaw set. The performance of control wavered. The homeless man straightened fully, shoulders back, calm but commanding. He didn't speak, but the weight of his presence carried decades of resilience, discipline, and quiet power. A veteran of wars, now fighting a different battle, one of visibility, justice, and human dignity. Then the officer's radio crackled. A sharp beep cut through the murmuring crowd. Backup. Reinforcements. Escalation. He felt the shift instantly. The officer's stance hardened, every movement calculated for control, but the public's gaze had shifted permanently. Every eye on the scene was a mirror of accountability, reflecting authority's fragility. The homeless man's fists unclenched slowly, the tension in his shoulders settling just enough to signal calm. He had survived much worse than public mockery, much worse than authority misused. But the stakes had changed. This time, the battlefield wasn't a desert or a war zone. It was a sidewalk in the city. And the enemy, prejudice, bias, and abuse of authority, was visible, public, and accountable. Cliffhanger, a voice shouted from the crowd. "Hey, leave him alone." The officer turned sharply. The air thickened. Tension exploded. Something was about to happen that could change everything. The officer's hand hovered over his radio, fingers twitching. Backup was coming. His lips pressed tight, jaw stiff. He adjusted his uniform, straightened the badge that now felt like armor shielding him from judgment. "Step back," he barked, voice sharp, brittle. Every word was an attempt to reclaim authority, but the crowd's attention made it wobble. Phones pointed like spotlights, eyes scrutinizing his every move. The homeless man stayed calm, knees bent to pick up crumbs that had scattered in the gust of wind. His movements were deliberate, controlled, a silent assertion of dignity. "You think standing there makes you look heroic?" The officer spat, stepping closer. "You're just causing trouble." "I'm not causing trouble," the man said quietly, measured, every word precise. "I'm existing. You're the one creating conflict." The officer's face darkened. "Don't talk back to me." From the crowd, whispers rose. Murmurs of disagreement, questions. Some phones zoomed in. Faces recorded the confrontation. The officer pulled out a notebook, scribbling notes. A citation? An official record? Every motion was calculated to intimidate, to assert dominance. "You're writing me up?" the man asked softly, voice even, controlled, but tension coiled in it. "For what?" "Breathing." The officer didn't answer. He scribbled faster, eyes darting toward the witnesses. The crowd pressed closer, curiosity swelling, solidarity stirring. The officer's authority was no longer absolute. It was contested, visible, fragile. The homeless man's mind raced. He could argue, resist, walk away, but patience, strategy, discipline taught him restraint. Each second stretched, weighted with risk. A wrong move could escalate. Yet silence was also power. "Step back now or I'll call it in," the officer said, voice low, threatening. A teenage bystander raised his phone. "We're recording." The officer's eyes flicked toward the lens. Fear flashed, quickly masked by anger. His posture stiffened, hands moving toward his belt, fingers brushing holster and radio. The power dynamic was shifting, minutely but unmistakably. The homeless man picked up the last crumbs, dusted his jacket, and rose. Heightened awareness. Every micro-expression, every glance, every slight movement carried weight. He remembered every mission, every order, every life saved. The battlefield had changed, but his training, his discipline, his courage were the same. "Sir, people are watching you," someone in the crowd said, voice calm but firm. "What you're doing is wrong." The officer's eyes narrowed, shoulders tight, lips pressed. Authority versus accountability. A struggle as old as power itself. The officer's notebook shook slightly in his hand, the pen poised like a weapon he couldn't fully control. Then came the radio crackle. A voice, backup approaching. Reinforcements that could escalate tension or intimidate further. The officer's smirk was gone. His stance was defensive, brittle. The crowd stirred, murmurs rising into cautious shouts. Phones glinted in the morning sun like tiny mirrors reflecting injustice. Every word the officer spoke now carried risk, every action witnessed. The homeless man stood tall, silent but commanding. No words. No reaction. Just presence. A veteran of wars, a survivor of chaos, confronting a different kind of battlefield. One of bias, microaggression, and the abuse of authority. "Do you know who you're dealing with?" The officer finally spat, voice shaking with forced control. "I do," the man replied, calm but firm. "And so does everyone watching." The officer's pen faltered. He glanced around, noticing the crowd, the phones, the journalists. Authority, once absolute, now fragile under the public gaze. A gust of wind kicked up again, papers fluttering, a subtle symbolic crack in the officer's armor. The homeless man's gaze followed each movement, calculating, patient, unflinching. Cliffhanger, a uniformed backup car turned the corner. Its siren low, almost silent, but the implication was loud. The crowd tensed. The officer froze. Something in this moment would change everything. The wail of a siren grew louder as the backup car rolled up, lights flashing but subdued, almost ceremonial. The officer straightened instantly, chest stiff, jaw tight. Authority was a performance, but today it was fragile. Every eye on the street chipped away at the illusion. "Step aside," one of the backup officers barked, uniform crisp, posture rigid. His tone was official, precise, but judgment hung in the air, invisible yet heavy. The first officer gestured toward the homeless man. "He's causing a scene. I was about to issue a citation." "Citation for what?" the backup asked, voice clipped, notebook in hand. The question wasn't innocent. It was loaded, bureaucratic, legal, and threatening. The homeless man's hands tightened around the bag. He stood straight, shoulders squared, calm but ready. His voice was measured. "Breathing. Standing. Existing. I did nothing wrong." A murmur ran through the crowd. Phones zoomed, lenses pointed. The power of documentation weighed more heavily than the officer's badge. The officer's fingers brushed the holster. The homeless man felt it. He didn't flinch, didn't retreat, but his jaw clenched. He had survived firefights, explosions, chaos, but authority twisted by prejudice carried a quiet, subtle danger he couldn't ignore. "You don't understand," the officer spat, voice strained. "I have to maintain order. You can't just stand there and—" "Order?" the homeless man interrupted, calm but sharp. "Order doesn't mean erasing someone's dignity. It doesn't mean mocking the invisible. It doesn't mean silencing witnesses." The backup officer glanced at him, eyes flicking between the small crowd and the original officer. Micro-expressions of bias surfaced: surprise, doubt, tension. Codes of authority whispered silently between uniforms. "Sir, I'm asking you to comply," the first officer snapped, frustration peeking through his tone. "I will have no trouble reporting this." The homeless man's mind raced, every memory of service, discipline, survival sharpening his focus. He weighed confrontation and strategy, his calm like armor. The stakes had shifted. This was no longer just ridicule. It was potential legal entanglement, manipulation of systems meant to protect, now weaponized against him. "Write what you want," he said finally, soft but deliberate. "Truth will see the light." Another gust of wind scattered crumbs across the pavement, and the officer's notebook shook slightly in his hands. Every word recorded could be evidence, every scribble a potential weapon or liability. The crowd pressed closer, whispers rising, some voices braver now. "You're doing the wrong thing," a woman said firmly. "Stop harassing him." The officer's lips thinned. His authority was cracking. Every gesture exaggerated, controlled, but failing to command the space as it once had. The backup officer cleared his throat, holding a subtle tension in the air. Either comply or escalate. "Step back, both of you," the homeless man said calmly, signaling with his hands. His eyes scanned the crowd, the officers, every micro-expression, every subtle shift in posture. He was aware of psychological pressure, emotional manipulation, and coded signals. The first officer turned toward the crowd, then back at him. "You'll regret this. You think the public cares? We make the rules. You break them, you pay. You think rules give you power over truth?" the homeless man asked. "Witnesses, cameras, facts, they see more than your uniform ever could." The officer's hands flexed near his holster. Micro-tremors betrayed fear hidden behind anger. The weight of accountability, the reality of being observed began to erode the facade. The crowd shifted, murmurs rising into words. "He's not doing anything wrong. Leave him alone." The officer's radio crackled again. Commands from dispatch, a signal that things could spiral legally in an instant. The sound was low but loaded with implication. Escalation imminent, stakes higher, scrutiny unavoidable. The homeless man straightened fully, his breathing measured, shoulders square. Every muscle spoke readiness and resilience. He had survived real war, real chaos. But now he fought with witnesses, truth, and the quiet weight of morality. A young man in the crowd stepped forward, phone in hand. "I'm streaming this. The public should know what's happening." The officer's face tightened. Panic brushed at his edges, masked by forceful control. Authority was no longer absolute. It was vulnerable, exposed, observed. The homeless man's eyes followed the flicker of lights, the twitch of a notebook, the subtle shift in posture. Every microtwist mattered. Every word, every gesture, every silent witness could turn the tide. Cliffhanger. The officer grabbed the phone from the teenager's hand. The crowd gasped. Every heartbeat stretched taut. Something in this moment would decide whether power or truth prevailed. The morning sun glinted off the officer's badge, but it felt dim compared to the flashing lenses of phones and cameras surrounding him. The homeless man stood firm, calm, his presence heavy with discipline honed over decades. The whispers in the crowd had grown into murmurs, murmurs into questions. People were paying attention, and the officer knew it. One of the witnesses stepped forward, phone out. "This is being recorded. The public will see everything," she said, voice steady, unwavering. The officer's hand twitched near his holster. Authority, once absolute, now trembled under observation. "You don't know what you're doing," he barked, a little too loud. His eyes darted from lens to lens, from face to face. The weight of scrutiny pressed against him like invisible chains. The homeless man's jaw tightened. He had survived firefights, chaos, and betrayal, but this was a different kind of battlefield. Silence, observation, and public judgment were weapons, and he wielded them with discipline. A journalist emerged from the edge of the crowd, blazer neat, notebook ready. "Officer, are you threatening this man illegally?" Her voice cut through the morning air. Authority clashed with accountability. The officer faltered. His notebook shook in his hands. He glanced around at the witnesses, at the lenses of countless phones, at the murmurs of the crowd. His confidence, usually unshakable, wavered. Every word he said could now be scrutinized, every motion recorded. The homeless man took a slow, deliberate breath, measuring the tension in the air. He remembered standing on foreign soil, issuing orders that decided life and death. Now he wielded patience instead of weapons, observation instead of artillery. Every microexpression mattered, every gesture counted. A woman's voice rose above the crowd. "Sir, you're abusing your power. Leave him alone." Others chimed in, tentative at first, then stronger. Their voices grew like waves pressing against the officer's fragile authority. The first officer's lips thinned. "Step back," he barked. His face reddened, veins flicking at the temple. Power, once unquestioned, now felt brittle, fractured. The homeless man's eyes scanned the scene. Backup had arrived but hadn't intervened yet. Their presence was meant to intimidate, but the public gaze had shifted. Authority without trust or respect was hollow. He straightened fully, shoulders squared. His calm was deliberate. Witnesses felt it, cameras captured it, the officer noticed it. A veteran of wars, a survivor of chaos, confronting a battlefield of prejudice and observation. The radio crackled again. This time, a different voice, calm but commanding. Dispatch asking for clarification, reporting the public attention, hinting at accountability. The officer's face tightened. He glanced down at his notebook. Evidence, exposure, consequence, all in motion. A passerby called out, "We're posting this online. People need to see how you treat him." The officer flinched subtly. He knew the implications. His authority might be intact in his department, but public perception was merciless. The homeless man's jaw relaxed just slightly. Every witness, every camera, every observer was a shield and a weapon. He didn't speak. Words could escalate. Silence carried gravity. The crowd shifted, anticipation growing. Phones captured every flick of a wrist, every tense posture, every fleeting micro-expression. The officer's training in command and control was failing under scrutiny. Authority without accountability was collapsing. The homeless man remembered his own past. Metal ribbons glinting in sunlight, letters of commendation, families he had protected. Here, those accolades didn't matter. Visibility, truth, and presence mattered. Public eyes were justice in progress. The officer muttered, This isn't over. His voice trembled slightly, betraying tension, worry, fear beneath the forced control. The homeless man's gaze didn't waver. Calm, composed, resilient. The crowd felt it. Phones recorded it. Witnesses felt it. Authority had been challenged and exposed. Cliffhanger. A text buzzed on the officer's phone. Dispatch. Incident is being escalated to internal affairs. Public complaint filed. Every face in the crowd held expectation. Something was about to happen that could end his unchecked authority. The office buzzed with murmurs as the officer sat at his desk, hands gripping the edge, pale face taut. Internal affairs had flagged the incident. Public complaints circulated. Cameras, phones, and social media feeds replayed every gesture, every tense moment from the street. He glanced at his reflection in the darkened window. The badge, once a symbol of unquestioned authority, now felt like a spotlight highlighting his misjudgment. Every twitch, every smirk, every microaggression was being dissected in public view. Meanwhile, the homeless man, still standing tall from the street encounter, was approached by journalists and witnesses. Phones, notebooks, and cameras captured his calm dignity. The murmurs of the crowd had transformed into deliberate coverage. His story, his discipline, his resilience. "Sir, can you tell us what happened?" a reporter asked, voice calm but insistent. "I was approached unfairly," the man said, measured, precise. "I did nothing illegal. I was humiliated publicly. But now people see the truth." The officer's eyes narrowed as he watched a live feed of the encounter circulating online. Comments scrolled in real time. Unfair treatment. Power abuse. Justice delayed but coming. The weight of public scrutiny pressed against him. Back at the street, witnesses shared testimony. The woman who had stepped forward during the incident spoke first. He didn't provoke anyone. The officer abused his authority, intimidated him, threatened him. Others nodded, voices blending into a chorus of accountability. Even the teenagers with their phones joined in, narrating exactly what they saw. Each statement chipped away at the officer's credibility, exposing him piece by piece. Inside the department, whispers began. Internal affairs investigators were already cross-referencing reports, noting the video evidence, the crowd statements, and social media traction. Authority, once unassailable, now teetered. The homeless man reflected quietly, recalling the battlefield lessons: control, patience, strategy. Here, in public, those lessons mattered just as much. He was not helpless. Observation, evidence, and composure were his weapons. The officer, meanwhile, tried to regain footing. "You people don't understand. This is protocol," he muttered, voice trembling slightly. A journalist interrupted. "Protocol doesn't justify harassment or abuse of power." A bystander shouted, "He's right. You can't just threaten people like that." Cameras zoomed in, capturing every flicker of guilt, every failed attempt at authority. The officer's palms sweated. Microtremors betrayed tension as he realized that every decision he had made was now visible, scrutinized, and potentially punishable. The weight of accountability pressed down, heavier than any public shaming he had imagined. The homeless man, though calm, allowed a flicker of satisfaction. Justice, slow and meticulous, was in motion. Not revenge, but visibility. Not retaliation, but truth. The public gaze was leveling the battlefield, exposing prejudice, bias, and abuse. Voices rose in unison. Journalists narrating, witnesses commenting, phones streaming live. The officer's veneer of control cracked further with each second. Internal policies, departmental rules, public expectation, they converged to dismantle the authority he had wielded carelessly. Then came a whisper from the back. A key witness, a community leader, had contacted authorities ready to testify. That single action could tip the scales entirely. Cliffhanger. The officer froze, realizing he might face formal investigation, public shame, and legal consequences. His hands shook slightly as he reached for the phone, an action that could seal his fate. The sun was low now, casting long shadows across the city street where the confrontation had unfolded days earlier. Cameras still lingered, but the energy had shifted. No longer a spectacle of tension, it was a stage for accountability, for truth finally visible. The officer sat in the Internal Affairs office, hands folded, face pale. The evidence was overwhelming. Multiple witness statements, recorded footage, and social media exposure that had gone viral. Every instance of mockery, every gesture of intimidation, every abuse of authority was documented. There was no escape. A supervisor cleared his throat. "You're suspended pending investigation. Misconduct, abuse of authority, it's all documented." The officer's jaw tightened. Authority, once a shield, now felt like chains. He opened his mouth, tried to speak, but words faltered. Public exposure, legal consequence, and moral accountability had aligned against him. Meanwhile, the homeless man walked slowly down the sidewalk, shoulders square, chest open. He had survived battles, explosions, and chaos. Now he survived public judgment, systemic injustice, and erasure. His steps were quiet but deliberate, each one a testament to dignity reclaimed. A journalist approached, notebook ready. "Sir, what does this mean to you?" He paused, letting a faint smile touch his lips. "It means that truth matters. That people see what's real, not what's convenient for authority. That even when society turns a blind eye, justice can find its way." Cameras clicked. Phones recorded. Witnesses nodded. The invisible had become visible. Back at the department, murmurs of consequence spread. Colleagues whispered, officers reconsidered protocols, training was discussed. Institutional reflection began. The officer, once confident, now faced scrutiny he could not evade. Yet the victory was bittersweet. The homeless man remembered every slight, every microaggression, every dismissal that had worn him down over years. Recognition could not erase trauma, could not erase fear, could not restore the stolen dignity entirely. But it was a start. Visibility was justice, acknowledgement was victory. A community leader stepped forward, shaking the man's hand. "You stood your ground. You reminded us all that accountability matters." He nodded, eyes scanning the city street, the crowd, the cameras. Every silent witness had mattered. Every recorded moment had mattered. He felt the weight of survival and resilience pressing in, heavy, grounding, affirming. The officer finally left the building, shoulders slumped, face pale, stripped of authority by consequence. He would be remembered not for rank, but for misjudgment. Public exposure had rewritten the story. The homeless man walked past him on the street, eyes forward, dignity intact. He didn't gloat, didn't provoke, didn't glance back. He carried himself with the quiet authority of one who had survived chaos, fought bias, and emerged acknowledged, even if the world remained imperfect. The city hummed around him, cars, voices, footsteps. Life moved on, but justice, slow and deliberate, had found its mark. Recognition was quiet but piercing, like sunlight breaking through clouds. Final lines, cinematic and reflective. Survival isn't always about fighting with your hands. Sometimes it's patience, presence, and letting truth rise. Today it did.